Testing. Okay. Good. Good. Yo, hope y'all are doing good this fine evening. Yeah, hope everything's been going well for you. Hope your day's been going pretty well. Hope it's been not too stressful. But even if it has been, sympathies from myself. But hope that you can ease in now. For me, it's about 7 p.m., but for many other people around the world, it's later in the day. So maybe you are up later than you should be. It happens to the best of us. But either way, let's continue on with Frankenstein. We're making good progress in the book. We're actually nearly done. Have about 10 chapters left to get through, so let's finish like about five or so four. Well, I have it set for like 4 chapters to finish today. Oh shit, man. I'll figure it out later. We'll see if we'll either end at chapter 19 or chapter 20. I'm not sure which one I want to end on today. We'll see how I feel. But either way, from our last place that we left off, we are hearing the story of Frankenstein's monster from himself. He's lamenting to Frankenstein, the dear old doctor, how he escaped his creator's previous abode, and where he has been, how he's learned the language, how he's learned about humanity, and all that good shit. But yes, and now we're continuing on, where he is still hiding with the cottagers, and what other horrors he has in store for both the monster and the doctor himself. But either way, let us continue. Right, right then. One second. Okay. Right, let us continue on then. Let us continue. Chapter 15. Such was the history of my beloved cottagers. It impressed me deeply. I learned from the views of social life which it developed to admire their virtues and to deprecate the vices of mankind. As yet I looked upon crime as a distant evil; benevolence and generosity were ever present before me, inciting me with a desire to become an actor in the busy scene where so many admirable qualities were called forth and displayed. But in giving an account of the progress of my intellect, I must not omit a circumstance which occurred in the beginning of the month of August of the same year. One night, during my accustomed visit to the neighboring wood, where I collected my own food and brought home firing for my protectors, I found on the ground a leathern portmanteau. A portmanteau? What the fuck? Again, apologies if I don't know some of the language in here. This book is hundreds of years old at this point. Never mind, never mind. Containing several articles of dress and some books. I eagerly seized the prize and returned with it to my hovel. Fortunately, the books were written in the language, the elements of which I had acquired at the cottage. They consisted of Paradise Lost, a volume of Plutarch's Lives and The Sorrows of Werther. The possession of these treasures gave me extreme delight. I now continually studied and exercised my minds upon these histories, whilst my friends were employed in their ordinary occupations. I could hardly describe to you the effect of these books. They produced in me an infinite, yeah, they produced in me an infinite, whatever, I knew. They produced in me an infinite of new images and feelings that sometimes raised me to ecstasy, but more frequently sunk me into the lowest dejection. In The Sorrows of Werther, besides the interest of its simple and affecting story, so many opinions are canvassed and so many lights thrown upon what had hitherto been to me obscure subjects that I found in a never-ending source of speculation and astonishment. The gentle and domestic manners it described, combined with lofty sentiments and feelings which had for their object something out of self, according well with my experience among my protectors and with the wants which were forever alive in my own bosom. But I found Werther himself a more divine being than I had ever beheld or imagined. His character contained no pretension, but it sank deep. The disquisitions upon death and suicide were calculated to fill me with wonder. I did not pretend to enter into merits of the case, yet I inclined towards the opinion of the hero whose extinction I wept, without precisely understanding it. As I read, however, I applied much personally to my own feelings and condition. I found myself similar, yet at the same time strangely unlike to the beings concerning whom I read and whose conversation I was a listener. I sympathized with and partly understood them, but I was uninformed in mind. I was dependent on none and related to none. The path of my departure was free, and there was none to lament my annihilation. My person was hideous and my stature gigantic. What did this mean? Who was I? What was I? Whence did I come? What was my destination? These questions continually recurred, but I was unable to solve them. The volume of Plutarch's Lives which I possessed contained the histories of the first founders of the ancient republics. This book had a far different effect on me from the Sorrows of Werther. I learned from Werther's imaginations despondency and gloom, but Plutarch taught me high thoughts. He elevated me above the wretched sphere of my own reflection, to admire to admire and love the heroes of past ages. Many things I read surpassed my understanding and experience. I had a very confused knowledge of kingdoms, wide extents of country, mighty rivers, and boundless seas, but I was perfectly unacquainted with towns and large ensembles of men. The cottage of my protectors had been the only school in which I had studied human nature, but this book developed new and mightier sense of action. I read of men concerning in public affairs, governing or massacring their species. I felt the greatest ardor for the virtue rise within me, an abhorrence of her vice, and, as far as I understood, the significance of those terms, relative as they were, as I applied them, to pleasure and pain alone. Induced by these feelings, I was, of course, led to admire peaceable lawgivers, Numa, Solon, and Lycurgus, in preference to Romulus and Theseus. The patriarchal lives of my protectors caused these impressions to take a firm hold on my mind. Perhaps if my first introduction to humanity had been made by a young soldier, burning for glory and slaughter, I should have been imbued with different sensations. But Paradise Lost excited different and far deeper emotions. I read it, as I had read the other volumes which had fallen into my hands, as true history. It moved every feeling of wonder and awe that the picture of an omnipotent God warring with his creatures was capable of exciting. I often referred to several situations as their similarity struck me to my own. Like Adam, I was apparently united by no link other than being in existence, but his state was far different from mine in every other respect. He had come forth from the hands of gods a perfect creature, happy and prosperous, guarded by the especial care of his Creator. He was allowed to converse with and acquire knowledge from beings of superior nature, but I was wretched, helpless, and alone. Many times I considered Satan as the fitter emblem of my condition, for often, like him, when I viewed the bliss of my protectors, the bitter gall of envy rose within me. Another circumstance strengthened and confined these feelings. Soon after my arrival in the hovel, I discovered some papers in the pocket of the dress which I had taken from your laboratory. At first I had neglected them, but now I was able to decipher the characters in which they were written. I began to study them with diligence. It was your journal of 4 months that preceded my creation. You minutely described in these papers every step you took in the process of your work. This history was mingled with accounts of domestic occurrences. You doubtless, you doubtless recollect these papers. Here they are. Everything is related in them which bears reference to my accursed origin. The whole details of that series of disgusting circumstances which produced his descent in view. The minutest description of my odious and loathsome person is given, in language which painted your own horrors and rendered mine inedible, or indelible, indelible, the fuck is it? Alright, rendered mine indelible. I sickened as I read. Hateful day when I received life, I exclaimed in agony. Accursed traitor! Why did you form a monster so hideous that even you turned from me in disgust? God, in pity, made man beautiful and alluring, after his own image, but my form is a filthy type of yours, more horrid even from the very resemblance. Satan has his companions, fellow devils to admire and encourage him, but I am solitary and abhorred. These were the reflections of my hours of despondency and solitude. But when I contemplated the virtues of the cottagers, their amiable and benevolent dispositions, I persuaded myself that when they should become acquainted with my admiration of their virtues, they would compassionate me and overlook my personal deformity. Could they turn from their door one, however monstrous, who solicited their compassion and friendship? I resolved at least, not to despair, but in every way to fit myself for an interview with them which would decide my fate. I postponed this attempt for some months longer, for the importance attached to its success inspired me with a dread lest I should fail. Besides, I found that my understanding improved so much with every day's experience that I was unwilling to commence this undertaking until a few more months should be added to my sagacity. Several changes in the meantime took place in the cottage. The presence of Safi diffused happiness among its inhabitants, and I also found that a greater degree of plenty reigned there. Felix and Agatha spent more time in amusement and conversation, and were assisted in their labors by servants. They did not appear rich, but they were contented and happy. Their feelings were serene and peaceful, while mine became every day more tumultuous. Increase of knowledge only discovered to me more clearly what a wretched outcast I was. I cherished hope, it is true, but it vanished when I beheld my person reflected in water, or my shadow in moonshine, even as that frail image of that inconstant shade. 1 second, please. Let me just check on my stream quality. I can sometimes be a bit paranoid, just making sure that my stream hasn't crashed. Just want to check that everything's good. Yep, everything seems to be in order. Everything seems to be all in order. Good. Good, 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 good. Right then. Oh, excuse me. I endeavored to crush these fears and to fortify myself for the trial which in a few months I resolved to undergo, and sometimes I allowed my thoughts, unchecked by reasons, to ramble in the field of paradise, and dare to fancy amiable and lovely creatures sympathizing with my feelings and sharing my gloom. Their angelic countenances breathed smiles of consultation, but it was all a dream. No Eve soothed my sorrows nor shared my thoughts. I was alone. I remembered Adam's I remembered Adam's supplication to his creator, but where was mine? He had abandoned me, and in the bitterness of my heart, I cursed him. Autumn passed thus. I saw with surprise and grief the leaves decay and fall, and nature again assumed the barren and bleak appearance it had worn when I first beheld the woods and the lovely moon. Yet I did not heed the bleakness of the weather. I was better fitted by my conformation for the endurance of cold than heat. But my chief delights were the sight of the flowers, the birds, and all the gay apparel of summer. When those deserted me, I turned with more attention towards the cottagers. Their happiness was not decreased by the absence of summer. They loved and sympathized with one another, and their joys, depending on each other, were not interrupted by the casualties that took place around them. The more I saw of them, the greater became my desire to claim their protection and kindness. My heart yearned to be known and loved by these amiable creatures, to see their sweet looks directed towards me with affection with the utmost limit of my ambition. I dared not think that they would turn them from me with disdain and horror. The poor that stopped at their door was never driven away, and I asked, it is true, for greater treasures than a little food or rest. I required kindness and sympathy, but I did not believe myself utterly unworthy of it. The winter advanced, and my entire revolution of the seasons had taken place since I awoke into life. My attention at this time was solely directed towards the plan of introducing myself into the cottage of my protectors. I resolved many projects, but that on which I finally fixed was to enter the dwelling when the blind old man should be alone. I had sagacity enough to discover that the unnatural hideousness of my person was the chief object of the horror with those who had formerly beheld me. My voice, although harsh, had nothing terrible in it. I thought, therefore, that if the absence of his children I could gain the goodwill and mediation of the old De Lacy, I might by his means be tolerated by my younger protectors. One day, when the sun shone on the red leaves that strewed the ground and diffused cheerfulness, although it denied warmth, Safie, Agatha, and Felix departed on a long country walk, and the old man, at his own desire, was left alone in the cottage. When his children departed, he took up his guitar and played several mournful but sweet airs, more sweet and mournful than I had ever heard him play before. At his first countenance was illuminated with pleasure, but as he continued, thoughtfulness and sadness succeeded. At length, laying aside the instrument, he sat absorbed in reflection. My heart beat quick. This was the hour and moment of trial which would decide my hopes or realize my fears. The servants were gone to a neighboring fair. All was silent, and around the cottage it was an excellent opportunity. Yet, when I proceeded to execute my plan, my limbs failed me, and I sank to the ground. Again I rose, and exerting all the firmness of which I was the matter, removed the planks which I had placed before my hovel to conceal my retreat. The fresh air revived me, and with renewed determination, I approached the door of the cottage. I knocked. "Who is there?" said the old man. "Come in." I entered. "Pardon the intrusion," I said. "I am a traveler in want of a little rest. You would greatly oblige me if you would allow me to remain a few minutes before the fire." "Enter," said De Lacy. "I will try in what manner I can to relieve your wants, but, unfortunately, my children are from home, and as I am blind, I am afraid I shall find it difficult to procure food for you." "Do not trouble yourself, my kind host. I have food. It is warmth and rested only that I need." I sat down, and silence ensued. I knew that every minute was precious to me, yet I remained irresolute in what manner to commence the interview, when the old man addressed me. "By your language, stranger, I suppose you are my countryman. Are you French?" "No, but I was educated by a French family and understand that language only. I am now going to claim protection of some friends whom I sincerely love, and whose favors I have some hopes." "Are they Germans?" "No, they are French, but let us change the subject. I am an unfortunate and deserted creature. I look around, and I have no relation or friend upon earth. These amiable people to whom I go have never seen me or know little of me. I am full of fears, for if I fail there, I am an outcast in the world forever." "Do not despair. To be friendless is indeed to be unfortunate, but the hearts of man, when unprejudiced by any obvious self-interest, are full of brotherly love and charity. Rely, therefore, on your hopes, and if these friends are good and amiable, do not despair. They are kind, and they are most excellent creatures in this world, but unfortunately they are prejudiced against me. I have good dispositions. My life has been hitherto harmless and in some degree beneficial. but a fatal prejudice clouds their eyes. Where they ought to see a fleeing and kind friend, they behold only a detestable monster. That is indeed unfortunate. But if you are really blameless, cannot you undeceive them? I am about to undertake that task. It is on that account that I feel so many overwhelming terrors. I tenderly love these friends. I have, unknown to them, been for many months in the habit of daily kindness towards them, but they believe that I wish to injure them, and it is that prejudice I wish to overcome. Where do these friends reside? Near this spot. The old man paused and then continued. If you will unreservedly confide me to the particulars of your tale, I perhaps may be of use in undeceiving them. I am blind and cannot judge your countenance, but there is something in your words which persuades me that you are sincere. I am poor and an exile, but it will afford me true pleasure to be in any way serviceable to a human creature. Excellent man! I thank you and accept your generous offer. You raised me from the dust by this kindness, and I trust that, by your aid, I shall not be driven from the society and sympathy of your fellow creatures. Heaven forbid! Even if you were really criminal, for that can only drive you to desperation, and not instigate you to virtue. I also am unfortunate. I and my family have been condemned, although innocent, judged, therefore, if you do not feel for your misfortunes. How can I thank you, my best and only benefactor? From your lips first have I heard the voice of kindness directed towards me. I shall be forever grateful, and your present humanity assures me of success with those friends whom I am on the point of meeting. May I know the names and residence of those friends? I paused. This, I thought, was the moment of decision, which was to rob me or bestow happiness on me forever. I struggled vainly for firmness sufficient to answer him, but the effort destroyed all my remaining strength. I sat on the chair and sobbed aloud. At this moment I heard the steps of my younger protectors. I had not a moment to lose, but seizing the hand of the old man, I cried, Now is the time! Save and protect me! You and your family are the friends whom I seek. Ah, do not you desert me in the hour of trial. Great God! Exclaimed the old man. Who are you? At that instant the cottage door opened, and Felix, Safie, and Agatha entered. Who can describe their horror and consternation on beholding me? Agatha fainted, and Safie, unable to attend her friend, rushed out of the cottage. Felix started forward with supernatural force, tore me away from his father, whose nails I clung. In transport of fury, he dashed me to the ground and struck me violently with a stick. I could have torn him limb from limb, as the lion rends the antelope, but my heart sank within me as the bitter sickness, and I refrained. I saw him on the point of repeat his blow when, overcome by pain and anguish, I quitted the cottage, and in the general tumult escaped unperceived to my hovel. End of chapter 15. Let me just have some water very briefly. Hang on. Chapter 16. Cursed, cursed creator, why did I live? Why, in that instant, did I not extinguish the spark of existence which you had so wantonly bestowed? I know not. Despair had not yet taken possession of me. My feelings were those of rage and revenge. I could with pleasure have destroyed the cottage and its inhabitants, and have glutted myself with their shrieks and misery. When night came, I quitted my retreat and wandered in the woods, and now, no longer restrained by the fear of discovery, I gave vent to my anguish in fearful howlings. I was like a wild beast that had broken the toils, destroying the objects that had struck me, and ranging through the wood with a stag-like swiftness. Oh, what a miserable night I had passed! The cold stars shone in mockery, and the bare trees waved their branches above stillness. All, save I, were at rest or in enjoyment. I, like the arch-fiend, wore a hell within me, and, finding myself unsympathized with, wished to tear up the trees, spread havoc and destruction around me, and then to have sat down, enjoyed the ruin. But this was a luxurious sensation that I could not endure. I became fatigued with excess of bodily exertion, and sank on the on the damp grass in the sick impotence of despair. There was none among the myriads of man that existed which would pity or assist me. And should I feel kindness towards my enemies? No. From that moment I declared everlasting war against the species, and, more than all, against him who had formed me and sent forth this insupportable misery. The sun rose, I heard the voices of men, and knew that it was impossible to return to my retreat during the day. Accordingly, I hid myself in some thick underwood, determining to devote the ensuing hours to reflect on my situation. The pleasant sunshine and the pure air of the day restored me to some degree of tranquillity, and when I considered what had passed at my cottage, I could not believe that I had been too hasty in my conclusions. I had certainly acted imprudently, and it was apparent that my conversation had interested the father in my behalf, and that I was a fool in having exposed my person to the horror of his children. I ought to have familiarized the old De Lacy to me, and by some degrees to have discovered myself to the rest of the family, to his family, when they should have prepared for my approach, but I did not believe my errors to be irretrievable, and after much consideration, I resolved to return to the cottage. Oh, hey, Rise, how you doing? I'm just reading some literature here. It's actually for my homework I'm reading this book, but I figured why not turn it into a stream? But yeah, thanks for stopping by. Appreciate that. Hope you're doing well. Where was I? Ah, here we go. Drawing here. Cool. Story time. Indeed, story time. Feel free to chill or fall asleep to this. It's an order book, so it can be a bit droning, but it's still a classic. It's good that I read it. Where was I? Ah, yes. But I did not believe my errors to be irretrievable, and after much consideration, I resolved to return to the cottage, seek the old man, and buy my representations with him to my party. Distraction from or heat. Yeah. Any distraction from heat is always good. These thoughts calmed me, and in the afternoon, I sank into a profound sleep, but the fever of my blood did not allow me to be visited by peaceful dreams. The horrible scene of the preceding day was forever acting before my eyes. The females were flying, and the enraged Felix tearing me from his father's feet. I awoke exhausted, and finding that it was already night, I crept forth from my hiding place, and went in search of food. When my hunger was appeased, I directed my steps towards the well-known path that conducted to the cottage. All was at peace. I crept into my hovel, and remained in silent expectation of the accustomed hour when the family arose. That hour passed, the sun mounted high in the heavens, but the cottagers did not appear. I trembled violently, apprehending some dreadful misfortune. The inside of the cottage was dark, and I heard no motion. I cannot describe the agony of this suspense. Presently, the two countrymen passed, but pausing near the cottage, they entered into conversation, using violent gesticulations, but I did not understand what they said, as they spoke the language of the country, which differed from that of my protectors. Soon after, however, Felix approached with another man. I was surprised, as I known that he had not quitted the cottage that morning. I waited anxiously to discover from his discourse the meaning of these unusual appearances. "Do you consider," said his companion to him, "that you will be obliged to pay 3 months' rent to lose the produce of your garden? I do not wish to take any unfair advantage, and I beg, therefore, that you will take some days to consider of your determination." "It is utterly useless," replied Felix. "We can never again inhabit your cottage. The life of my father is in the greatest danger, owing to the dreadful circumstance that I have related. My wife and sister will never recover from their horror. I entreat you not to reason with me any more. Take possession of your tenement, and let me fly from this place." Felix trembled violently as he said this. He and his companion entered the cottage, in which they remained for a few minutes, and then departed. I never saw any of the family of De Lacy once more. I continued for the remainder of my day in my hovel, and, in a state of utter and stupid despair, my protectors had departed and had broken the only link that held me to the world. For the first time, the feelings of revenge and hatred filled my bosom, and I did not strive to control them, but allowing myself to be borne away by the stream, I bent my mind towards injury and death. When I thought of my friends and the mild voice of De Lacy, the gentle eyes of Agatha, and the exquisite beauty of the Arabian, these thoughts vanished, and a gush of tears somewhat soothed me. But after, again, when I reflected that they had spurned and deserted me, anger returned, a rage of anger, and, unable to injure anything human, I turned my fury towards inanimate objects. As night advanced, I placed a variety of combustibles around the cottage, and having destroyed every vestige of cultivation in the garden, I waited, with forced impatience, until the moon had sunk to commence my operations. As the night advanced, a fierce wind arose from the woods, and quickly dispersed the clouds that had loitered in the heavens. The blast tore along like a mighty avalanche, and produced a kind of insanity in my spirits that burst all bounds of reason and reflection. I lighted a branch of a tree, and danced with fury around the devoted cottage, my eyes still fixed on the western horizon, the edge of which the moon nearly touched. A part of its orb was at length hid, and I waved my brand. It sank, and with a loud scream, I fired the straw, and heath, and bushes which I had collected. The wind fanned the flame, and the cottage was quickly enveloped by the flames, which clung to it and licked it with forked and destroying tongues. As soon as I was convinced that no assistance could save any part of the habitation, I quitted the scene, and sought for refuge in the woods. And now, with the world before me, whither should I bend my steps? I resolved to fly far from the scenes of my misfortune, but to me, hated and despised, every country must be equally horrible. At the length and thought that of you crossed my mind, I learned from your papers that you were my father, my creator, and to whom could I apply more fitness than to him who had given me life? Among the lessons that Felix had bestowed upon Safie, geography had not been omitted. I had learned from these the relative situation of the different countries of the earth. You had mentioned Geneva as the place of your native town, and towards this place I resolved to proceed. But how was I to direct myself? I knew that I must travel in a southwesterly direction to reach my destination, but the sun was my only guide. I did not know the names of the towns I was to pass through. Excuse me. Nor could I ask information from a single human being. But I did not despair, for you could only... Sorry about that. But I did not despair. From you only could I hope to scour. Although towards you I felt no sentiment but that of hatred. Unfeeling, heartless creator, you had endowed me with perceptions and passions, and then cast me abroad, an object for the scorn and horror of mankind. But on you only had I any claim for pity and redress, and from you I determined to seek that justice which I had vainly attempted to gain from any other being that wore the human form. My travels were long, and the sufferings I endured intense. It was late in autumn when I had quitted the district where I had so long resided. I traveled only at night, fearful of encountering the visage of human being. Nature decayed around me, and the sun became heartless. Rain and snow poured around me. Mighty rivers were frozen. The surface of the earth was hard and chill and bare, and I found no shelter. O earth! How often did I imprecate curses on the cause of my being! The mildness of my nature had fled, and all within me I was turned to gall and bitterness. The nearer I approach your habitation, the more deeply did I feel the spirit of revenge enkindled in my heart. Snow fell and the waters were hardened, but I rested not. A few instants now and then directed me. I possessed the map of the country, but I often wandered wide from my path. The agony of my feelings allowed me no respite. No incident occurred from which my rage and misery could not extract its food, but a circumstance that happened when I arrived on the confines of Switzerland. When the sun had recovered its warmth and the earth again began to look green, confirmed in an especial manner the bitterness and horror of my feelings. I generally rested during the day and traveled only when I was secured by night from the view of man. One morning, however, finding that my path lay through a deep wood, I ventured to continue my journey after the sun had risen. The day, which was one of the first spring, cheered even me by the loveliness of its sunshine and the balminess of the air. I felt emotions of gentleness and pleasure that had long appeared dead revive within me. Half surprised by the novelty of these sensations, I allowed myself to be borne away from them, and forgetting my solitude and deformity, dared to be happy. Soft tears again bedewed my cheeks, and I even raised my humid eyes with thankfulness towards the blessed sun, which bestowed such joy upon me. I continued to wind among the paths of the wood until I came to a boundary which was skirted by a deep and rapid river, into which many of the trees bent their branches, now budding with their fresh spring. Here I paused, not exactly knowing what path to pursue, but when I heard the sound of voices, that induced me to conceal myself under the shades of the cypress. I was scarcely hid when a young girl came running towards the spot where I was concealed, laughing as if she ran from someone in the sport. She continued her course from the precipitous sides of the river, when suddenly her foot slipped, and she fell into the rapid stream. I rushed from my hiding place, and with extreme labor from the force of the current, saved her and dragged her to the shore. She was senseless, and I endeavored every means in my power to restore animation, when I was suddenly interrupted by the approach of a rustic, which was probably the person from whom she had playfully fled. On seeing me, he darted towards me, and, tearing the girl from my arms, hastened towards the deeper part of the wood. I followed speedily. I hardly knew why, but when the man saw me draw near, he aimed a gun, which he carried, at my body, and fired. I sank to the ground, and my injurer, with increased swiftness, escaped into the wood. This was then the reward of my benevolence. I had saved a human being from destruction, and as recompensance, I now withered under the miserable pain of a wound which shattered the flesh and bone. The feelings of kindness and gentleness which I had entertained but a few moments before gave place to a hellish rage and gnashing of teeth. Inflamed by pain, I vowed eternal hatred and vengeance to all mankind. But the agony of my wound overcame me, and my pulse paused, and I fainted. For some weeks I led a miserable life from the woods, endeavored to cure the wound which I had received. The ball had entered my shoulder, and I knew not whether it had remained there or passed through. At any rate, I had no means of extracting it. My sufferings were augmented also by the oppressive sense of the injustice and ingratitude of their infliction. My daily vows rose for revenge, a deep and deadly revenge, such as would alone compensate for the outrages and anguish I had endured. After some weeks, my wound healed, and I continued my journey. The labors I endured were no longer to be alleviated by the bright sun or gentle breezes of spring. All joy was but a mockery which insulted my desolate state and made me feel more painfully than that I was not made for the enjoyment of pleasure. But my toils now drew near a close, and in 2 months from this time I reached the environs of Geneva. It was evening when I arrived, and I retired to a hiding place among the fields that I surrounded it to meditate in what manner I should apply to you. I was oppressed by fatigue and hunger, and far too happy to enjoy the gentle breezes of evening or prospect of the sun setting behind the stupendous mountains of Jura. At this time, a slight sleep relieved me from the pain of reflection, which was disturbed by the approach of a beautiful child who came running into recess that I had chosen. With all the sportiveness of infancy, suddenly, as I gazed on him, an idea seized me that this little creature was unprejudiced and had lived too short a time to have embedded a horror of deformity. If, therefore, I could seize him and educate him as my companion and friend, I should not be so desolate in this peopled earth. Urged by this impulse, I seized the boy as he passed and drew him before me. As soon as he beheld my form, he placed his hands before his eyes and uttered a shrill scream. I drew his hand forcibly from his face and said, "Child, what is the meaning of this? I do not intend to hurt you. Listen to me." He struggled violently. "Let me go," he cried. "Monster! Ugly wretch! You wish to eat me and tear me to pieces. You are an ogre. Let me go, or I will tell my papa." "Boy, you will never see your father again. You must come with me." "Hideous monster! Let me go! My papa, he is a syndic. He is Frankenstein. He will punish you. Do not dare keep me." "Frankenstein, you belong to my enemy, to him towards whom I have sworn eternal revenge. You shall be my first victim." The child still struggled and loaded me with epithets which carried deep despair into my heart. I grasped his throat to silence him, and in a moment he lay dead at my feet. I gazed on my victim, and my heart swelled with exultation and hellish triumph. Clasping my hands, I exclaimed, "I too can create desolation. My enemy is not invulnerable. This death will carry despair to him, and 1,000 other miseries shall torment and destroy him." As I fixed my eyes on the child, I saw something glittering on his breast. I took it. It was a portrait of a most lovely woman. In spite of my malignity, it softened and attracted me. For a few moments, I gazed with delight on her dark eyes, fringed by deep lashes, and her lovely lips. But presently, my rage returned. I remembered that I was forever deprived of the delights that such beautiful creatures could bestow, and that she whose resemblance I contemplated would, in regarding me, have changed that air of divine benignity to one expressive of disgust and affright. Can you wonder that such thoughts transported me with rage? I only wonder that at that moment, instead of venting my sensations in exclamations in agony, I did not rush among mankind and perish in the attempt to destroy them. While I was overcome by these feelings, I left the spot where I had committed the murder, and seeking a more secluded hiding place, I entered a barn which had appeared to me to be empty. A woman was sleeping on some straw. She was young, not indeed so beautiful as her whose portrait I held, but of an agreeable aspect and blooming in the loveliness of youth and health. Here, I thought, is one of the most joy-imparting smiles and bestowed on all, except me. I then bent over her and whispered, "Awake, fairest, thy lover is near. He who would give his life, but to obtain one look of affection from thine eyes, my beloved, awake." The sleeper stirred. A thrill of terror ran through me. Should she indeed awake and see me, and curse me, and denounce the murderer, thus she would assuredly act if her darkened eyes opened, and she beheld me. The thought was madness. It stirred the fiend within me. Not I, but she, shall suffer. The murder I have committed, because I am forever robbed of all that she could give, shall she atone. The crime had its source her, be hers the punishment. Thanks to the lessons of Felix and the sanguinity of laws of man, I learned now to work mischief. I bent over her, and placed the portrait securely in one of the folds of her dress. She moved again, and I fled. For some days, I haunted the spot where the scenes had taken place, sometimes wishing to see you, sometimes resolved to quit the world and its miseries forever. At length, I wandered towards these mountains and have ranged through their immense recesses, consumed by a burning passion which you alone can gratify. We may not part until you have promised to comply with my requisition. I am alone and miserable. Man will not associate with me, but one as deformed and horrible as myself would not deny herself to me. My companion must be of the same species and have the same defects. This being, you, must create. End of chapter 16. Right, chapter 17. Right, the being finished speaking and fixed his looks upon me in the expectations of a reply. So the past two chapters, those were from the perspective of Frankenstein's monster, and now we return to the perspective of Frankenstein. In the past couple of chapters, the monster was telling Frankenstein his own tales of how he escaped from Frankenstein's lab and how he was living alone and how he learned how much of a monster he was. And now, together in the snowy mountains, Frankenstein's monster and Frankenstein himself have met. And from here on out will be from Frankenstein's perspective. I was bewildered, perplexed, and unable to arrange my ideas sufficiently to understand the full extent of his proposition. He continued, "You must create a female for me, with whom I can live in the interchange of the sympathies necessary for my being. This you alone can do, and I demand it of you, as a right which you must not refuse to concede." The latter part of his tale had kindled anew in me the anger that had died away while he narrated his peaceful life among the cottagers. And as he said this, I could no longer suppress the rage that burned within me. "I do refuse it," I replied, "and no torture ever extort a consent from me. You may render me the most miserable of man, but you shall never make me base in my own eyes. Shall I create another like yourself, whose joint wickedness might desolate the world? Begone! I have answered you. You may torture me, but I will never consent." "You are wrong," replied the fiend, "and instead of threatening, I am content to reason with you. I am malicious because I am miserable. Am I not shunned and hated by all mankind? You, my creator, would tear me to pieces in triumph. Remember that, and tell me why I should pity man more than he pities me. You would not call it murder if you could precipitate me in one of those ice rifts and destroy my frame, the work of your own hands. Shall I respect man when he condemns me? Let him live with me in the interchange of kindness, and instead of injury, I would bestow every benefit upon him with tears of gratitude at his acceptance. But that cannot be. The human senses are insurmountable barriers to our union. Yet mine shall not be the submission of abject slavery. I will revenge my injuries. If I cannot inspire love, I will then cause fear, and chiefly towards you, my arch enemy, because, my creator, I do swear inextinguishable hatred. Have a care. I will work at your destruction, nor finish until I desolate your heart, so that you shall curse the hour of your birth." A fiendish rage animated him as he said this. His face was wrinkled into contortions too horrible for the human eye to behold. But presently he calmed himself and proceeded. "I intend to reason. This passion is detrimental to me, for you do not reflect that you are the cause of it to excess. If any being felt emotions of benevolence towards me, I should return them 100 and 100-fold. For that one creature's sake, I would make peace with the whole kind. But I now indulge in dreams of bliss that cannot be realized. What I ask of you is reasonable and moderate. I demand a creature of another sex, but as hideous as myself. The gratification is small, but it is all that I can receive, and it shall content me. It is true, we shall be monsters, cut off from all the world, but on that account, we shall be more attached to one another. Our lives will not be happy, but they will be harmless and free from the misery I now feel. Oh, my Creator, make me happy. Let me feel gratitude towards you for your one benefit. Let me see that I excite the sympathy of some existing thing. Do not deny me my request. I was moved. I shuddered when I thought of the possible consequences of my consent, but I felt that there was some justice in his argument. His tale and the feelings he had now expressed proved him to be a creature of fine sensations, and I did not, and did not, sorry, and did not, sorry, I can't speak, and did I not, as his maker, owe him all the portion of happiness that it was in my power to bestow? I saw my change of feeling and continued, if you consent, neither you nor any other human being shall ever see us again. I will go to the vast wilds of South America. My food is not that of a man. I will not destroy the lamb and the kid to glut my appetite. Acorns and berries afford me sufficient nourishment. My companion will be of the same nature as myself, and we will be content with the same fare. We shall make our bed of dried leaves. The sun will shine on us as on man, and will ripen our food. The picture I present unto you is peaceful and human, and you must feel that you could deny it only with the wantonness of power and cruelty. Pitiless as you have been towards me, I now see your compassion in your eyes. Let me seize the favorable moment and persuade you to promise what I so ardently desire. You propose, you propose, replied I, to fly from the habitations of man, to dwell in those wilds where the beasts of the field will be your only companions? How can you, who long for the love and sympathy of man, persevere in this exile? You will return again to seek their kindness, and you will be met with their destitution. Your evil passions will be renewed, and you will then have a companion to aid you in this task of destruction. This may not be. Cease to argue the point, for I cannot consent. How inconstant are your feelings! But a moment ago you were moved by my representations, and why do you again harden yourself to my complaints? I swear to you, by the earth which I inhabit, and by you that made me, that with the companion you bestow, I will quit the neighborhood of man, and dwell, as it may chance, in the most savage of places. My evil passions will have fled, for I shall meet with sympathy. My life will flow quietly away, and in my dying moments, I shall not curse my Maker. His words had a strange effect upon me. I compassionated him, and sometimes felt to wish to console him. But when I looked upon him, when I saw the filthy mass that moved and talked, my heart sickened, and my feelings whose altered to those of horror and hatred. I tried to stifle these sensations. I thought that I could not sympathize with him. I had no right to withhold from him the small portion of happiness which was yet in my power to bestow. You swear, I said, to be harmless, but have you not already shown a degree of malice that you should reasonably make me distrust you? May not even this feint that will increase your triumph by affording a wider scope for your revenge? How is this? I must not be trifled with. I must not be trifled with, and I demand an answer. If I have no ties, no affections, hatred and vice must be my portion. The love of another will destroy the cause of my crimes, and I shall become a thing of whose existence everyone will be ignorant. My vices are the children of a forced solitude that I abhor, and my virtues will necessarily arise when I live in communion with an equal. I shall feel the affections of a sensitive being, and become linked to the chain of existence and events from which I am now excluded. I paused some time to reflect on all that he had related, and the various arguments which he had employed. I thought of the promise of virtues which he had displayed on opening up his existence, and the subsequent blink of all kindly feeling by the loathing and scorn which his protectors had manifested towards him. His power and threats were not omitted in my calculations. A creature who could exist in the ice caves of the glaciers and hide himself from pursuit among the ridges of inaccessible precipices was a feeling of possessing facilities it would be in vain to cope with. After a long pause of reflection, I concluded that the justice due both to him and my fellow creatures demanded of me that I should comply with his request. Turning to him, therefore, I said, I consent to your demand, on your solemn oath to quit Europe forever, and every other place in the neighborhood of man, as soon as I shall deliver into your hands a female who will accompany you into your exile. I swear, he cried, by the sun, and by the blue sky of heaven, and by the fire of love that burns in my heart, that if you grant my prayer, while they exist, you shall never behold me again. Depart your home and commence your labors. I shall watch their progress with unutterable anxiety, and fear not but that when you are ready, I shall appear. Saying this, he suddenly quitted me. Fearful perhaps of any change in my sentiments, I saw him quickly descend the mountain with greater speeds than the flight of an eagle, and quickly lost among the undulations of the sea of ice. His tale had occupied the whole day, and the sun was on the verge of the horizon when he departed. I knew that I ought to hasten my descent towards the valley, as I should be encompassed by darkness, but by my, by my heart was heavy, and my steps slow. The labors of winding among the little paths of the mountain fixed my feet firmly, as I advanced perplexed me. Occupied as I was by the motions which the occurrences of the day had produced. Night was far advanced when I came to the halfway resting place and seated myself beside the fountain. The stars shone in intervals as the clouds passed from over them. The dark pines rose before me, and every here and there a broken tree lay on the ground. It was a scene of wonderful solemnity, and stirred strange thoughts within me. I wept bitterly, and clasped my hands in agony. I exclaimed, "Oh, stars and clouds and winds, ye are all about to mock me. If ye really pity me, trust sensation and memory, and let me become as naught. But if not, depart, depart and leave me in darkness." These are wild and miserable thoughts, but I cannot describe to you how the eternal twinkling of the stars weighed upon me, and how I listened to every blast of wind, as if it were if it was dull, ugly Siroc on its way to consume me. Okay. Morning dawned before I arrived at the village of Chamonix. Chamonix. I can't read French. I took no rest, but returned immediately to Geneva. Even in my own heart, I could give no expression to my sensations. They weighed on me with a mountain's weight, and their excess destroyed my agony beneath them. Thus, I returned home, and entered the house. I presented myself to the family. My haggard and wild appearance awoke intense alarm, but I alarmed no question. Scarcely did I speak. I felt as if I was placed under a ban, as if I had no right to claim their sympathies, as if never more might I enjoy companionship with them. Yet, even thus, I loved them to adoration, and to save them, I resolved to dedicate myself to the most abhorred task. The prospect of such an occupation made every other circumstance of existence pass before me like a dream, and that thought only had to me the reality of life. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18. Let me just get some water first. Right. Chapter 18. Day after day, week after week, passed away on my return to Geneva, and I could not collect the courage to recommence my work. I feared the vengeance of the disappointed fiend, yet, excuse me, Yet I was unable to overcome my repugnance to the task which was enjoyed me. I found that I could not compose a female without again devoting several months to profound study and laborious disquisition. I had heard some of the discoveries had been made by an English philosopher, the knowledge of which was material to my success. I sometimes thought of obtaining my father's consent to visit England for this purpose, but I clung ever to the pretense of delay and shrank from taking the first step into an undertaking whose immediate necessity began to appear less absolute to me. A change indeed had taken place in me. My health, which had hitherto declined, was now much restored, and my spirits, when unchecked by the memory of my unhappy promise, rose proportionally. My father saw this change with pleasure, and he turned his thoughts towards the best method of eradicating the remains of my melancholy, which, every now and then, returned by fits, and, with a devouring blackness, overcast the approaching sunshine. At these moments, I took refuge in the most perfect solitude. I passed whole days on the lake alone in a little boat, watching the clouds and listening to the rippling of waves, silent and listless. With the fresh air and bright sun seldom failed to restore me to some degree of composure, and on my return I met the salutations of my friends with the readier smile and a more cheerful heart. It was after my return from one of these rambles that my father, calling me aside, thus addressed me. I am happy to remark, my dear son, that you have resumed your former pleasures and seem to be returning to yourself. And yet you are still unhappy, and still avoid our society. For some time I was lost in conjecture as to the cause of this, but yesterday an idea struck me, and if it is well founded, I conjure you to avow it. Reserve on such a point would not be only be useless, but draw down would draw down terrible misery on all of us. I trembled violently at his exordium, and my father continued. I confess, my son, that I have always looked forward to your marriage with our dear Elizabeth, as the tie of our domestic comfort and the stay of my declining years. You are attached to each other from your earliest infancy. You studied together and appeared in disproportions and tastes, entirely suited to one another. But so blind is the experience of a man that which I conceived to be the best assistance to plan may have entirely destroyed it. You, perhaps, regard her as your sister, without any wish that she may become your wife. Nay, you may have met with another whom you may love, and, considering yourself as bound in honor to Elizabeth, this struggle may occasion the poignant misery which you appear to feel. My dear father, reassure yourself. I love my cousin tenderly and sincerely. I never saw any woman who excited as Elizabeth does. My warmest admiration and affection, my future hopes and prospects are entirely bound up in the expectation of our union. The expression of your sentiment of this subject, my dear Victor, gives me more pleasure than I have had for some time experienced. If you feel thus, we shall be assuredly be happy, however present events may cast a gloom over us. But it is this gloom which appears to have taken so strong of a hold in your mind that I wish to dissipate. Tell me, therefore, whether you object to an immediately solemnization of the marriage. We have been unfortunate, and recent events have drawn us from the everyday tranquillity befitting my years and infirmities. You are younger, yet I do not suppose, possessed as you are of competent fortune, that an earlier marriage would at all interfere with any future plans of honor and utility that you may have formed. Do not suppose, however, that I wish to dictate happiness to you, or that a delay on your part would cause me any serious uneasiness. Interpret my words with candor and answer me. I conjure you, with confidence and sincerity. I listened to my father in silence and remained for some time incapable of offering any reply. Bloody hell. I revolved rapidly in my mind a multitude of thoughts and endeavored to arrive at some conclusion. Alas, to me the idea of an immediate union with my Elizabeth was one of horror and dismay. I was bound by a solemn promise which I had not yet fulfilled, and dared not break, or, if I did, what manifold miseries might not impend over me and my devoted family. Could I enter into a festival with this deadly weight, yet hanging round my neck and bowing me to the ground? I must perform my engagement and let the monster depart with his mate before I allowed myself to enjoy the delight of a union from which I expected peace. I remembered also the necessity imposed upon me of either journeying to England or entering into a long correspondence with those philosophers of that country whose knowledge and discoveries were of indispensable use to me in my present undertaking. The latter method of obtaining the desired intelligence was dilatory and unsatisfactory. Besides, I had an insurmountable aversion to the idea of engaging myself in my loathsome task in my father's house, while inhabitants of a familiar intercourse with those I love. I knew that 1,000 fearful accidents might occur, the slightest of which would disclose a tale to thrill all connected with me with horror. I was aware that I should often lose all self-command, all capacity of hiding the harrowing sensations that would possess me during the progress of my unearthly occupation. I must absent myself from all that I loved while thus employed. Once commenced, it would quickly be achieved, and I might be restored to and I might be restored to my family in peace and happiness. My promise fulfilled, the monster would depart forever, or so my fond fancy imagined. Some accident might meanwhile occur to destroy him and put an end to my slavery forever. These feelings dictated my answer to my father. I expressed a wish to visit England, but concealed the true reasons of this request. I closed my desire under the guise which excited to no suspicion, while I urged my desire with an earnest that easily induced my father to comply. After so long a period of an absorbed melancholy that resembled madness in its intensity and effects, he was glad to find that I was capable of taking pleasure in the idea of such a journey, and he hoped that the change of scene and varied amusement would, before my return, have restored myself entirely to myself. During the year of my absence was left to my own choice. A few months, or at most a year, was the period contemplated. Paternal kind, sorry, one paternal kind precaution he had taken to ensure me my having a companion. Without previously communicating with me, he had, in concert with Elizabeth, arranged that Clerval should join me in Strasbourg. This interfered with the solitude I coveted for the prosecution of my task. Yet, at the commencement of my journey, the presence of my friend could in no way be a be an be impediment. Could be an impediment. Ah, bloody hell! And I truly rejoiced that thus I should be saved many hours of lonely, maddening reflection. Nay, Henry might stand between me and the intrusion of my foe. If I were alone, would he not at times force his abhorred presence on me to remind me of my task or to contemplate its progress? To England, therefore, I was bound, and it was immediately understood that my union with Elizabeth should take place immediately on my return. My father's age rendered him extremely adverse to delay. For myself, there was one reward I promised myself for my detested toils, one consultation for my imperiled sufferings. It was the prospect of the day when, enfranchised from my miserable slavery, I might claim as Elizabeth and forget the past in my union with her. I now made arrangements for my journey, but one feeling haunted me, which filled me with fear and agitation. During my absence, I should leave my friends unconscious of the existence of their enemy and unprotected from his attacks. Exasperated as he might be by my departure, but he had promised to follow me wherever I might go, and would he not accompany me to England? This imagination was dreadful in itself, but soothing inasmuch as it supposed the safety of my friends. I was agonized with the idea of the possibility that the reverse of this might happen, but through the whole period during which I was the slave of my creature, I allowed myself to be governed by the impulses of the moment, and my present sensation strongly strongly intimate. Bloody hell, sorry. Like I said, this is an old book. There's a lot of English that's older that I'm not familiar with. Strongly intimated that the fiend would follow me and exempt my family from the danger of his machinations. It was in the later end of September that, again, I quitted my native country. My journey has been of its own suggestion, and Elizabeth therefore acquisite, fucking hell, acquisite, but she was filled with disquiet at the idea of my suffering. Away from her, the inroads of misery and grief, it had been in her care which provided me and a companion in Clerval. And yet a man is blind to 1,000 minute circumstances which call forth a woman's sedulous attention. She longed to bid me hasten my return. 1,000 conflicting emotions rendered her mute as she bade me a tearful, silent farewell. I threw myself into the carriage that was to convey me away, hardly knowing whither I was going, and careless of what I was passing around. I remembered only, and it was with a bitter anguish that I reflected on it, to order that my chemical instruments should be packed to go with me. Filled with dreary imaginations, I passed through many beautiful and majestic scenes, but my eyes were fixed and unobserving. I could only think of the bore of my travels and the work which was to occupy me whilst they endured. After some days spent in listless indolence, during which I traversed many leagues, I arrived at Strasbourg, where I waited 2 days for Clerval. He came, alas, how great was the contrast between us! He was alive to every new scene, joyous when he saw the beauties of the setting sun, and more happy when he beheld us rise and recommence on a new day. He pointed out to me the shifting colors of the landscape, and the appearances of the sky. "This is what it is to live," he cried. "How I enjoy existence! But you, my dear Frankenstein, wherefore are you desponding and sorrowful?" In truth, I was occupied by gloomy thoughts, and neither saw the descent of the evening star nor the golden sunrise reflected in the Rhine. And you, my friend, would be far more amused with the journal of Clerval, who observed the scenery with an eye of fleeing and delight, than in listening to my reflection. I, a miserable wretch, haunted by a curse that shut up every avenue to enjoyment. We had agreed to descend the Rhine in a boat from Strasbourg to Rotterdam, whence we might take shipping for London. During this voyage we passed many willowy islands, and saw several beautiful towns. We stayed at Mannheim, and on the 5th from our departure from Strasbourg, arrived at Mainz. The course of the Rhine below Mainz became much more picturesque. The river descends rapidly, and the winds between hills, not high but steep, and of beautiful forms. We saw many ruined castles standing on the edges of precipices, surrounded by black woods, high and inaccessible. This part of the Rhine, indeed, presents a singular, variegated landscape. On one spot, you view rugged hills, ruined castles overlooking tremendous precipices, while the dark Rhine rushing beneath, and on the sudden turn of fragment. Bloody hell! Sorry, I think I need a little bit more water. That's better. We traveled out at the time of the vintage and heard the songs of the laborers as we glided down the stream. Even I, depressed in mind, and my spirits continually agitated by gloomy feelings, even I was pleased. I lay at the bottom of the boat, and as I gazed on the cloudless blue sky, I seemed to drink in tranquillity to which I had long been a stranger. And if these were my sensations, who can describe those of Henry? He felt as if he had been transported to fairyland, and enjoyed a happiness seldom tasted by a man. "I have seen," he said, "the most beautiful scenes of my own country. I have visited the lakes of Lucerne and Uri, where the snowy mountains ascend almost perpendicularly to the water, casting black and impenetrable shades, which would cause a gloomy and mournful appearance were it not for the most verdant islands that believe the eye by their gay appearance. I have seen this lake agitated by a tempest, when the wind tore up the whirlings of water and gave you an idea of what the waterspout must be on the great ocean, and the waves dashed with fury the base of the mountain where the priest and mistress were overwhelmed by an avalanche and where their dying voices are still said to be heard still heard amid the pauses of the nightly wind. I have seen the mountains of La Vallis and Pays de Vaunt, but this country, Victor, pleases me more than all those wonders. The mountains of Switzerland are more majestic and strange, but there is a charm at the banks of this divine river that I never before saw equaled. Look at that castle which overhangs yon precipice, and that also on the island, almost concealed amongst the foliage of those lovely trees. And now that group of laborers coming from among their vines, and that village half hid the recesses of the mountain. Oh, surely the spirit that inhabits and guards this place has a soul more in harmony with man than those who climb the glacier or retreat to those inaccessible peaks of the mountain up on our own country. Clerval, beloved friend, even now it delights me to record your words and to dwell on the praise of which you so immensely deserving. He was a being formed in the very poetry of nature. His wild and enthusiastic imagination was chastened by the sensibility of his heart. His soul overflowed with an ardent affections, and his friendship was that of devoted and wondrous nature, and that world-minded teach us to look only in the imagination. But even human sympathies were not sufficient to satisfy his eager mind. The scenery of external nature, which others regard only with admiration, he longed with the door. Sorry, I'm just looking at something. Words with he longed with a door. The sounding cataract haunted him like a passion, the tall rock, the mountain, and the deep and gloomy wood. Their colors and their forms were then to him an appetite, a feeling, and a love, that had no need of repertoire charm, but thought supplied or any interest, unborrowed from the eye. Wordsworth, Titan Arby. And where does he now exist? In this gentle and lovely being lost forever? Has this mind so replete with ideas, imaginations, fanciful and magnificent, which formed a world whose existence depended on the life of its creator? Had this mind perished? Does it now only exist in memory? No, it is not thus. Your form, so divinely wrought and beaming with beauty, has decayed, but your spirit still visits and consoles your unhappy friend. Pardon this gush of sorrow. These ineffectual words are but a slight tribute to the unexampled worth of Henry, but they soothe my heart. Overflowing with the anguish which his remembrance creates, I will proceed with my tale. Just a bit of context here. This is from the perspective of Victor, but he's actually recounting all his journeys because currently he's on a ship and he's actually telling his tales to one of the people on the ship. I believe it's the captain of the ship. So he's like recounting all of these in the past. That's why it's all from his first person. But yeah, these are all from like Victor's past. He's recounting his tales if you need a little bit of context. Alright. Beyond Cologne, we descend to the plains of Holland, and we resolve to the post reminder of our way, for the wind was contrary and the stream of the river was too gentle to aid us. Our journey here lost the interest arising from the beautiful scenery, but we arrived in a few days at Rotterdam, whence we proceeded by sea to England. It was on a clear morning, in the latter days of December, that I first saw the white cliffs of Britain. The banks of the Thames presented a new scene. They were flat but fertile, and almost every town was marked by the remembrance of some story. We saw Tilbury Fort and remembered the Spanish Armada, Gravesend, Woolwich, and Greenwich, places which I had heard even in my country. At length we saw numerous steeples of London, St. Paul's towering above all, and the tower famed in English history. End of chapter 18. Right, on to chapter 19. Let me just have a bit more water. Make sure I have proper hydration and my throat isn't completely chafed. There we go. Right. Chapter 19. London was our present point of rest. We determined to remain several months in this wonderful, celebrated city. Clerval desired the intercourse of the intercourse of the men of genius and talent who flourish at this time. But this was with me a secondary object. I was principally occupied with the means of obtaining the necessary information for the completion of my promise, and quickly availed myself of the letters of introduction that I had brought with me. Addressed to the most distinguished natural philosophers. If this journey had taken place during my days of study and happiness, it would have afforded me inexpressible pleasure. But a blight had come over my existence, and I had only visited these people for the sake of the information they might give me on the subject in which my interest was so terribly profound. Company was irksome to me. When alone, I could fill my mind with the slights of heaven and earth. The voice of Henry soothed me, and I could thus cheat myself into a transitory peace. But busy, uninteresting, joyous faces brought back despair to my heart. I saw an insurmountable barrier placed between me and my fellow men. This barrier was sealed with the blood of William and Justine, and to reflect onto the events connected with those names filled my soul with anguish. But in Clerval, I saw the image of my former self. He was inquisitive and anxious to gain experience and instruction. The difference of manners which he observed was to him an inauxisible, bloody hell, bloody hell, there we go, inhospitable source of instruction and amusement. He was also pursuing an object he had long had in view. His design was to visit India, and in the belief that he had in his knowledge of its various language, and in the views he had taken of its society, the means of materially assisting the progress of a European colonization and trade. In Britain he could only further the execution of his plan. He was forever busy, and the only check of his enjoyment was my sorrowful and dejected mind. I tried to conceal this as much as possible, that I might not debar him from the pleasures natural to one who was entering on to the new scene of life, undisturbed by any care or bitter recollection. I often refused to accompany him, alleging by another engagement, that I might remain alone, and I now was also beginning to collect the materials necessary for my new creation. This was to me like the torture of single drops of water continually falling on the head, even every thought that was devout to it was an extreme anguish, and every word that I spoke in allusion to it caused my lips to quiver and my heart to palpitate. After passing some months in London, we received a letter from a person in Scotland who had formerly been our visitor at Geneva. He mentioned the beauties of his native country, and asked us if those were not sufficient allurements to induce us to prolong our journey as far north as Perth, where he resided. Clerval eagerly desired to accept this invitation, and I, although I abhorred society, wished to view again mountains and streams and all the wondrous works in which nature adorns his chosen dwelling places. We had arrived in England at the beginning of October, and it was now February. We accordingly determined to commence our journey towards the north at the expiration of another month. In this expedition we did not intend to follow the great road to Edinburgh, but to visit Windsor, Oxford, Matlock, and the Cumberland Lakes, resolving to arrive at the completion of this tour about the end of July. I packed up my chemical instruments and the materials I had collected, resolving to finish my labors in some obscure nook in the northern highlands of Scotland. We quitted London on the 7th of March, and remained a few days at Windsor, rambling in its beautiful forest. This was a new scene to us mountaineers. The majestic oaks, the quality of game, and the herds of the stately deer were all novelties to us. From thence we proceeded to Oxford. As we entered the city, our minds were filled with the remembrance of events that had been transacted there more than a century and a half before. It was here that Charles and I had collected his forces. This city had remained faithful to him, and after the whole nation had forsaken his cause to join the standard of parliament and liberty, the memory of that unfortunate king and his companions, the amiable Falkland, the insolent Goring, his queen and son, gave a peculiar interest to every part of the city which they might be supposed to have inhabited. The spirit of elder days found a dwelling here, and we delighted to trace its footsteps. And these feelings, had we not found an imaginary gratification, the appearance of the city had yet in itself sufficient beauty to obtain our admiration. The the colleges are ancient and picturesque. The streets are almost magnificent, and the lovely Isis, which flows besides through meadows of exquisite verdure, it spread forth into a placid expanse of waters, which reflects its majestic which reflects its majestic assemblage of towers and spires and domes, em- embosomed among aged trees. I enjoyed this scene, and yet my enjoyment was embittered both by the memory of the past and the anticipation of the future. I was formed for peaceful happiness. During my youthful days, discontent never visited my mind, and if I was ever overcome by ennui, the sight of what is beautiful in nature or the study of what is excellent and sublime in the productions of man could always interest my heart and communicate elasticity to my spirits. But I am a blasted tree. The bolt has entered my soul, and I felt then that I should survive the exhibit what I shall soon cease to be, a miserable spectacle of a wretched humanity, pitiable to others and intolerable to myself. We passed a considerable period at Oxford, rambling among amongst its environs and endeavoring to identify every spot which might relate to its most animating epoch of English discovery. Our little voyages of discovery were often prolonged by the successive objects that presented themselves. We visited the tomb of illustrious Hampden, and the field of which that patriot fell. For a moment my soul was elevated from its debasing and miserable fears to contemplate the divine ideas of liberty and self-sacrifice, of which these sites were the monuments and remembrancers. For an instant I dared to shake off my chains and look around me with a free and lofty spirit, but the iron had eaten into my flesh. I sank again, trembling and hopeless, into my miserable self. We left Oxford with regret and proceeded to Matlock, which was our next place of rest. The country in the neighborhood of this village resembled, to a greater degree, the scenery of Switzerland, but everything is on a lower scale, and the green hills want the crown of distant white Alps, which always attend on the piney mountains of my native country. We visited the wondrous caves and the little cabinets of natural history, where the curiosities are disposed in the same manner as in the collections at Servox and Chamonix. The latter name made me tremble when pronounced by Henry, and I hastened to quit Matlock, with which that terrible scene was thusly associated. From Derby, still journeying northwards, we passed 2 months in Cumberland and Westmoreland. I can now almost fancy myself among the Swiss mountains. The little patches of snow which yet lingered on the northern sides of the mountains, the lakes, and the dashings of the rocky streams, were all familiar and dear sights to me. Here also we made some acquaintances, who almost contrived to cheat me into happiness. The delight of Clerval was proportionably greater than mine. His mind expanded in the company of in the company of men of talent, and he found in his own nature greater capacities and resources that he could have imagined himself to have possessed while he associated with his inferiors. I could pass my life here, he said to me, and among these mountains I should scarcely regret Switzerland and the Rhine. But he found that a traveler's life is one that includes much pain amidst its enjoyments. His feelings are forever on the stretch, and when he began to sink into repose, he finds himself obliged to quit that on which he rests in pleasure for something new, which again engages his attention and which also he forsakes other novelties. We had scarcely visited the various lakes of Cumberland and Westmoreland and conceived an affection for some of the inhabitants when the period of our appointment with our with our Scotch with our Scotch friend approached, and we left them to travel on. For my own part, I was not sorry. I had now neglected my promise for some time, and I had feared the effects of the demon's disappointment. He might remain in Switzerland and wreak his vengeance on my relatives. The idea pursued me and tormented me at every moment from which I might otherwise have snatched repose and peace. I waited for my letters with feverish impatience. If there was a delay, sorry, if they were delayed, I was miserable and overcome by 1,000 fears. And when they arrived, and I saw the and the su- bloody hell, and I saw the superscription of Elizabeth or my father, I hardly dared to read and ascertain my fate. I sometimes thought that the fiend followed me and might expedite my remisses by murdering my companion. When these thoughts possessed me, I would not quit Henry for a moment, but followed him as his shadow, to protect him from the fancied rage of his destroyer. I felt as if I had committed some great crime, the consciousness which haunted me. I was guiltless, but I had indeed drawn down a horrible curse upon my head, as mortal as that of crime. I visited Edinburgh, and with languid eyes and mind, and yet the city might have interested the most unfortunate being. Clairvaux did not like it so well as Oxford, and for the antiquity of the latter city was more pleasing to him. But the beauty and regularity of the new town of Edinburgh, its romantic castle and its romantic castle and its environs, the most delightful in the world, Arthur's Seat, St. Bernard's Well, and Pentland's Hills, compensated him for the change and filled him with cheerfulness and admiration. But I was impatient to arrive at the termination of my journey. We left Edinburgh in a week, passing through Copar, St. Andrews, and along the banks of Tay to Perth, where our friend expected us. But I was in no mood to laugh and talk with strangers, or into their feelings or plans with the good humor expected from a guest, and accordingly I told Clerval that I wished to make the tour of Scotland alone. Do, said I, enjoy yourself, and let this be our rendezvous. I may be absent a month or two, but do not interfere with my motions. I entreat you, leave me to peace and solitude for a short time, and when I return, I hope you will be with a lighter heart, more congenial to your own temper. Henry wished to dissuade me, but seeing me bent on this plan, ceased to remonstrate. He entreated me to write often. I had rather be with you, he said, in your solitary rambles than with those Scotch people, whom I do not know. Hasten, then, my dear friend, to return, that I may myself feel myself somewhat at home, which I cannot do in your absence. Having parted from my friend, I determined to visit some remote spot of Scotland and finish my work in solitude. I did not doubt but that the monster followed me and would discover himself to me when I should have finished, that he might receive his companion. With this resolution, I traversed the northern highlands and fixed on one of the remotest of Orkneys. As the seat of my labors, it was a place fitted for such a work. Being hardly more than a rock whose high sides were continually beaten upon by the waves, the soil was barren, scarcely affording pasture for a few miserable cows, and oatmeal for its inhabitants, which consisted of 5 persons, whose gaunt and scraggy limbs gave tokens of their miserable fare. Vegetables and bread, when they indulged in such luxuries, and even fresh water, was to be procured from the mainland, which was about 5 miles distant. On the whole island there was but 3 miserable huts, and one of these was vacant when I arrived. This I hired. It contained but 2 rooms, and these exhibited all the squanderousness of most miserable penury. The thatch had fallen in, the walls were unplastered, and the door was off its hinges. I ordered it for it to be repaired, bought some furniture, and took possession, an incident which would doubtless have occasioned some surprise, had not all senses of the cottagers been benumbed by want and squalid poverty. As it was, I lived ungazed and as unmolested. I lived ungazed at and unmolested, hardly thank the pittance of food and clothes which I gave, so much does suffering blunt even the coarsest sensations of men. In this retreat I devoted the mornings to labor, and in the evening, when the weather permitted, I walked on the stony beach of the sea to listen to the waves as they roared and dashed at my feet. It was a monotonous yet ever-changing scene. I thought of Switzerland. It was far different from this desolate and appalling landscape. Its hills are covered with vines, and its cottages were scattered thickly in the plains. Its fair lakes reflected blue and gentle sky, and when troubled by the wind, their tumult is but as the play of lively infant when compared to the roarings of the giant ocean. In this manner, I distributed my occupations when I first arrived, but as I proceeded in my labor, it became every day more horrible and irksome to me. Sometimes I could not prevail myself to enter my laboratory for several days, and other times I toiled day and night in order to complete my work. It was, indeed, a filthy process in which I was engaged. During my first experiment, a kind and enthusiastic frenzy had blinded me to the horror of my employment. My mind was intently fixed on my consumption of my labor, and my eyes were shut to the horror of my proceedings. But now I went to it in cold blood, and my heart often sickened at the work of my hands. Thus situated, employed the most detestable occupation, immersed in a solitude where nothing could for an instant call my attention from the actual scene in which I was engaged. My spirits became unequal. I grew restless and nervous. Every moment I feared to meet my persecutor. Sometimes I sat with my eyes fixed on the ground, fearing to raise them, lest they should encounter the object which I so dreaded to behold. I feared to wander from the sight of my fellow creatures, lest when he should come claim his companion. In the meantime, I worked on, and my labor was already considerably advanced. I looked towards its completion with a tremendous and eager hope, which I dared not trust myself to question, but which was intermixed with obscure forebodings of evil that made my heart sicken in my bosom. End of chapter 19. Alright, so I finished chapter 19. I am debating whether or not I should do one more chapter. Let me see how many pages chapter 20 is. Let's see. Okay, it's about 9 pages long, so it's not a very long chapter. Let's see. So there are 5 chapters left in the book. Let's see, I've gone through 5 chapters today. I did chapters 15 through 19, so 1, 2. Yeah, I did 5 chapters today. Let's see, I've been on for about an hour and 37 minutes. Oh, should I do another chapter, or should I wait till next time? Because I have it scheduled like in about 2 or 3 days that I'm gonna finish the book. So I'm just wondering whether or not I should do one more chapter here or save it for next time. You know what? I have it planned out for. Actually, let me check my schedule. And what was my plan? What was my plan? I'm checking to see if I was planning on having reading Frankenstein after another stream, or if I was planning it on just being its own. Okay, on April 6th. Yeah, April 6th, I have it finishing Frankenstein, also at 7 p.m. Nothing is before then. Let's see, I could do a guerrilla to do something before that, though. Oh, decisions. Oh no, I have a plan with a friend to meet earlier in the day, so yeah, I should keep that being at 7. Let's see. Maybe I think I should leave it here then. Yeah. I should save these 5 chapters for. Yeah, I should leave these 5 chapters for Saturday for me, so I could finish it then. Because I'm meeting with a friend earlier in that day, so I'll be streaming at 7 p.m. again on Saturday. Yeah, I probably won't have time to stream again before that. Right, so I'll leave it here then. I will leave it here. Right, we got through 5 chapters today, and we have 5 chapters left of this book. We're nearly done. These last 5 chapters are the most interesting ones, and they have the most content in them in terms of actual horror. Yeah. But hey, I personally really like reading, but I don't really read older stories like this. But it is good to read the classics just to see how language has shifted, how even like storytelling methods have shifted, because you can just see by how the story is written, how I'm not going to say primitive, but how storytelling was a lot more, I guess, descriptive of like each individual nuance, where he was like very detailed with many things. Whereas nowadays, it's a lot more generalized in order to get to like the main story beats. I'm not going to say which one is either better or worse, they're just different. And of course, it's order, so there's ordered English, so it can be a bit hard to understand, or it's not as much of a passive reading thing. But you know, it is still a classic, and it is still good to read these, and it's nice to see how it's the original story is different from more modern interpretations. But with that, I suppose I will be leaving you. So, if anyone ever watches this VOD in the future, much appreciated, greatly. It is your viewership is much appreciated, and for some reason, if you ever decide to watch these VODs, not sure why you would, but again, I appreciate it. But yeah, so this is pretty much going to be Val Esong signing out. Have a damn good one, y'all, and take care, y'all. Johnny, I'm sorry, the fuck, no, not Johnny. Galga, God fucking damn it, alright. I'm tired, I need to get some food. Alright, have a damn good one, y'all. Take care.